Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is...
Murder Coaster.
Today, ladies and gentlemen, we bring you the horrible tale of Colin Pitchfork, the Footpath Phantom, a murdering serial rapist who haunted the dark woods and paths of Leicestershire, England, stalking teenage girls like a troll in a fairy tale, and would become the first killer caught and convicted with DNA evidence. A bizarre tale with more twists and turns and red herrings than any mystery novel.
Let's begin. Prologue: The Footpath Phantom and the Village of Fear. August 5th, 1986. South Leicestershire, England. They'd done it. Police had finally solved the horrible footpath murders and rapes that had plunged the village of Narborough into fear and terror for years. They'd caught the infamous Footpath Phantom. Or so they thought.
All right, I have to interject real quick here, because who named the guy the Footpath Phantom? That sounds like a Batman villain, not someone who viciously rapes and murders 15-year-old girls. When I hear Phantom, I think of like a playful ghost, not a psychosexual murderer preying on children. Couldn't they have thought of something better? Like the Narborough Evil, the Footpath Strangler, the Village Psycho Killer, the horrible raping and murdering monster in the shadows. I don't know. I mean, if they're trying to get teenagers to stop walking the footpaths at night, you'd think they'd come up with something scarier than the Phantom.
I have to agree. I'm in full agreement with that. The village of Narborough, which is Old English for Northern Stronghold, is about 6 miles southwest of the Leicester city centre, neighboured by the villages of Enderby to the north and Littlethorpe to the south. Quaint and historic places of granite cottages, narrow lanes, grey slate roofs covered in moss, surrounded by English countryside and farmland, a patchwork of ridge and furrow fields.
The horror began on November 22nd, 1983, when the body of 15-year-old Linda Mann had been found off the black pad footpath by the Gothic brick buildings of the Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital.
Linda had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death.
The tranquil village of Narborough was thrown into terror, and the press christened the place as the Village of Fear.
Despite a huge police investigation, the case went cold. The whispers of a rapist and flasher lurking in the shadows persisted.
Then, 3 years after the murder of Linda Mann, the body of 15-year-old Dawn Ashworth was found off the nearby 10-Pound Lane footpath. She too had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death before being dragged into a field and covered in brush.
By this time, a number of witnesses told of seeing a motorcyclist in the area with a red helmet, which led investigators to an intellectually disabled 17-year-old with a history of sexual deviancy, molestation, and pedophilia, who worked as a kitchen porter at the psychiatric hospital, which loomed over both locations.
Brought in for questioning, the kitchen porter soon gave a full confession to the murder of Dawn Ashworth, and police announced they'd found their man. They'd captured and arrested the Footpath Phantom.
There was only one problem. Though he confessed to killing Dawn Ashworth, he steadfastly denied any involvement with the Linda Mann murder on the Black Pad Path.
So the police's chief superintendent sought to prove that he was also the killer of Linda Mann by using a brand new technology that had been invented just 6 miles away at the University of Leicester, a newfangled process of genetic identification called DNA fingerprinting.
The inventor of the process, Dr. Alec Jeffreys, said it was always a struggle to get funding. So he was eager to do anything that would bring attention to the discovery and show the many uses of the brand new technology, and he readily agreed to test the semen samples left on both of the victims.
And the samples matched each other, meaning the same person had killed both girls. The problem was, it was not the kitchen porter who'd done it. He'd given a false confession, which many intellectually disabled suspects will do under heavy pressure from the police.
And so on November 21st, 1986, legal and forensic history was made when the first accused murderer in the world was set free as a result of DNA testing.
But they did now have the killer's DNA profile. They just had to find a match to it. How? How could they find a match to this DNA?
Well, they came up with an answer, which they called the blooding. They would try to take blood from every single man in the surrounding 3 villages who'd been old enough to have committed the murders and weed the killer out.
It was a daunting, monumental task, unheard of, and on very shaky legal grounds. Testing would be voluntary, but anyone who refused would be an instant suspect.
So on New Year's Day, 1987, the blooding began, as scores of men were brought in to give blood and prove their innocence, a number eventually reaching into the thousands.
But the Footpath Phantom would be elusive and sly until the end, slipperier than a cod, and try to evade their net of DNA fingerprinting in a story which would eventually, after the craziest of twists and turns imaginable, result in the first time a killer was caught through DNA evidence.
Buckle up, because here we go.
Chapter 1, Colin Pitchfork.
Colin Pitchfork was born on the 23rd of March, 1960, in the village of Newbold Verdon in Leicestershire. He was the middle child with an older sister and younger brother. His father was a miner, and they lived in the house his mother had inherited from her parents.
His mother was said to be the head of the family. Some would even say she dominated over the others. And his older sister, like her mother, was assertive, went to study medicine and become a microbiology researcher. And his younger brother received a degree in engineering. But Colin was the black sheep. As he would later say, quote, "The majority of school was a waste of time, and the same with the church. Me mother was religious, but I found it all hypocritical. All the bloody church ever done was make money from the old ladies to make itself rich."
But Colin was active in the Scouts, rising through the ranks and becoming a leader. Though even then, he was already showing signs of sociopathy and deviancy. As Colin himself would say,
"I remember how the other boys used to make fun of me in school when I was in the shower because I was bigger than most and had pubic hair before the others. I guess the problem started then. I used to show it to girls. Right from the age of 11, I used to like to show it. I started going out in the streets to do it. I started showing it to strange girls."
By Colin's own estimates, He'd exposed himself to women over 1,000 times during the course of his life. It was a compulsion he couldn't control, even though he was caught many times, even at a very young age. As he says,
"The first time I got caught flashing, it had an effect on me mother of horror and upset. I got visited by a police constable who gave me a lecture and told me how to avoid a similar incident. That was worth bloody naught. Then I got caught doing another and had to go to court, and it got reported in the local paper, and they kicked me out of the scout movement. But you get that need. You go out sometimes and cover 50 or 60 miles, looking for that opportunity. It's the high I need. Yet sometimes I didn't get nothing out of it. You never knew how it would turn out."
Colin Pitchfork attended school in Market Bosworth, but quit school at 16 in 1976 and started working as an apprentice in Hampshire's bakery at Leicester. He became exceptionally skilled as a cake decorator, taking classes and rising up through the ranks to become one of the head bakers, and he hoped to start his own cake decorating business eventually.
According to his supervisor, he was, quote,
"A good worker and timekeeper, but he was moody and he couldn't leave women employees alone. He was always chatting them up."
In February of 1979, Colin Pitchfork attacked a 16-year-old schoolgirl walking home in a country lane. He came up from behind as she passed a gateway where he was hiding in the shadows, grabbed her by the neck and dragged her into a field, sliding his hand down the front of her jeans, and then he suddenly stopped and ran off, most likely ejaculating in his pants.
Colin met with his future wife, Carol, who was a social worker from a good family, while doing volunteer work in a children's home.
In 1981, Colin and Carol got married, and the couple started living together in Littlethorpe. But yet again, Colin was caught exposing himself. As his wife, Carol, would later say,
"I was naive. I simply didn't understand the business of flashing. I actually thought it was like giving up smoking or going on a diet. That it'd be difficult for a few weeks, then just go away. I had no idea how complex it all is. Anyway, according to Colin, the probation service told him he'd outgrow his problem, even though he was 21 at the time, and they put him on probation again."
Carol's father was a civil engineer. She'd been raised riding horses in competitions and winning medals, and her posh parents absolutely despised Colin, especially when it was revealed he was a serial flasher. And I hate the word flasher. It really diminishes the act. What he's doing is a type of sexual assault and a huge red flag.
And Colin couldn't stop himself. He was again caught exposing himself and was sent for psychiatric counseling at Carlton Hayes Hospital in Narborough, right there by the Black Pad Woodlands. He'd say about the experience,
"A waste of time. A bleeding waste. Probation officers and psychiatrists are quite happy if you tell them what they want to hear. I can't believe how easy it is to spin yarns to these people." Life carried on, and the flashing were also carrying on at a nice little rate.
In early 1983, Carol was pregnant, and Colin, being an utter piece of shit, started cheating on her with a young girl named Leslie he was taking cake decorating classes with. Colin saying,
"The flashing stopped the old time I was seeing Leslie. It stopped because I got a lot of excitement from her, combined with the excitement that Carol would catch me. Something I got a buzz from, because it was something I shouldn't be doing."
Classic sociopathic behavior, but Carol caught him and left him for a short time, only to soon come back, Colin telling her.
It was just one of those things, love. Cheerio.
In August, their son was born, and Carol vowed to forgive her wayward husband. Carol's father offered to buy the young family a house right outside Narborough Village, in a cul-de-sac called Haybarn Close.
Pitchforks in Haybarn.
Carol, in an effort to better herself, was taking night classes at Rowley Fields College at the time. And on the evening of November 21st, 1983, a bitterly cold night, the coldest night of the year, in fact, with a full moon hanging in the star-studded sky, Colin drove Carol to school in their red Ford Escort, their infant strapped safely in a baby seat in the back.
After dropping Carol off, their baby sleeping soundly in its car seat, Colin was driving by the Gothic brick buildings of the Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital, where he'd been an outpatient for his compulsion to expose himself, when he spied a pretty young girl walking along alone in the moonlight, entering into the shadows of the black pad footpath. A young girl named Linda Mann.
Chapter 2, Linda Mann and the Black Pad.
Linda Mann was a typical 15-year-old village girl, used to walking the paths and safe streets with her older sister, Susan.
She was 12 when her mother, Kathy, who'd divorced her father when Linda was 2, remarried a man named Eddie Eastwood, and they moved into his home near Forest Road, by the psychiatric hospital and the Black Pad Footpath.
It was an idyllic life. They had a garden and greenhouse, dogs, cats, an aviary with 72 parakeets. And soon Linda's mother, Kathy, was pregnant and bringing another daughter named Rebecca into the family.
They were genuinely happy. Susan, the oldest daughter, was shy and bookish, but Linda was adventurous. She loved music, makeup, and clothes, and would babysit to earn money. People described Linda as happy-go-lucky, bubbly, and enthusiastic. She was a good student and excelled in languages. By the time she was 15, she had already studied French, German, and Italian, and was getting ready to study Chinese. But sadly, that would never happen.
November 21st started like any other day. After school, Linda studied until 5, when she went and babysat for a neighbor until 6:30. After a quick supper, she was off to another babysitting job. But when she arrived, the woman told her she'd fallen sick and was staying home. So, Linda shrugged and went to visit her best friend Karen Blackwell.
It was, like we mentioned, the coldest night of the year. And she wore a thick scarf and her brand new black donkey jacket, which she'd proudly bought herself and was in the process of paying off.
If researching this case, you hear a lot about this brand new black donkey jacket, which honestly, I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. But researching, I found it really interesting. So a donkey jacket is just an untailored work coat made of thick wool, baggy, with really big pockets, often reinforced at the shoulders with leather or rubber. Like a navy pea coat without the lapels. Very beatnik looking. And because it has no fancy lapels, it's seen as working class, often worn by trade unionists, and became a symbol of the political left, and was eventually picked up by teddy boys, rockabillys, and traditional skinheads. You know, I'd rock one of these donkey jackets for sure. But like a lot of things that were originally working clothes and became trendy, they're now like really expensive. I found a really nice black one online. It cost $1,200. Definitely out of my price range.
That's insane for a jacket. Oh, goodness.
It's pretty cool looking though.
Already a layer of frost dusted the earth as Linda walked down Red Hill Avenue to her friend's house. At 7:30, she left to go to another friend's house, Caroline, whom she'd loaned a record to.
She walked up Forest Road, the moonlight casting shadows through the boughs of the elms, heading toward a streetlight where a footpath leads along pastureland belonging to the Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital and joins the Black Pad, a lonely path ambling through the woodlands towards the Narborough Church Cemetery, and she was never seen alive again.
When Linda didn't arrive home, her stepfather, Eddie Eastwood, drove around looking for her. Not finding her on the streets, he took to walking the footpaths, calling out her name, searching the black pad, not realizing she lay dead just a few yards away, on the other side of a tall, black wrought iron fence.
At 1:30 in the morning, the panicked family called the police to report their daughter missing.
At 7:20 the next morning, as the sun crested the trees of the woodlands, a hospital porter walking the black pad saw what he thought was a mannequin. Guys, it's never a mannequin. It was covered in frost, lying in the grass by a clump of trees.
There lay 15-year-old Linda Mann, her face bruised, scratched, and bloodied, the tip of her tongue protruding from her clenched teeth, naked from the waist down, her pale legs extended straight out, her head turned to the right, wearing the donkey jacket she was so proud of, her scarf tied tightly around her neck, her jeans, tights, and underwear in a heap 15 feet away.
The pathologist would discover bruises on her chest, suggesting the killer had knelt on her as he strangled her, and the cause of death was ruled asphyxia due to strangulation.
Dried seminal fluid was found in her pubic hair, the post-mortem report stating sexual intercourse was attempted and premature ejaculation occurred. And testing disclosed that the perpetrator was a Group A secretor PGM1+, which only accounted for 1 in 10 Englishmen.
Suspicion immediately fell on her stepfather, Eddie Eastwood, who'd searched vainly for her that night, and though he'd had an alibi for the estimated time of death, he was actually in a pub playing darts with an off-duty police officer. Investigators still very publicly dragged him down to the station to be interrogated and took blood samples, which came back as not being a Group A secretor, clearing him.
Suspicion then fell on patients at the Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital, though doctors there assured the public that none of the patients were violent and all had been accounted for that night.
Rumors spread about a pathway phantom, a flasher and rapist, now killer, roaming the interconnected villages, and paranoia grew. The newspapers began referring to Narborough as the Village of Fear.
A witness came forward saying they'd seen a punk rocker with spiked dyed green hair, a bomber jacket, and tall laced-up boots, seen running from the black pad, and a search was started, it being believed Linda could have had a secret boyfriend that was a punker, since she was adventurous and loved music.
But this quiet little village had no punks with spiky green hair who'd surely have stood out and be remembered.
Still, it was a bad time to even like punk music, as it made you a suspect.
100 officers were assigned to the case, who chased down each and every lead and began compiling a massive list of possible suspects. Anyone in the villages with a history of sexual crimes, or who had been an inmate at the psychiatric hospital.
On December 15th, it was announced lights would be installed on the black pad, and by February, 3,000 tips had come in, and every young man who'd ever gone through a punk rock phase had been interviewed. One officer stating, "This punk is as elusive as the flippin' Loch Ness Monster."
And at one point, officers came to interview one Colin Pitchfork, a local baker, as he lived not too far away, had been convicted of sex offenses, exposing himself to women, and had once been an outpatient at Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital.
But back then, flashers were considered perfectly harmless, and Colin had no record of actual violence. Just boys being boys then, eh? No worries, cheerio. Ugh. No, it's not normal and not harmless, and as we've seen in other cases like Randall Woodfield, the I-5 killer, flashing is a huge red flag and a form of sexual assault.
But Colin was alibied by his wife, Carol, who told them he'd driven her to classes that night, and their infant son had been in a car seat in the back. No one could possibly rape and murder a young girl while driving around with a sleeping infant in their car. Right?
Several tips led them to a young lad who prowled the parks on his bicycle and was known for hiding in the bushes and jumping out at women to scare them. A kid named Richard Birkland. But he was only 14 and frail, and investigators didn't think he'd have been able to physically overpower her, saying, "Linda would have been able to sort out a 14-year-old.
A psychic was called in, who warned that if the killer wasn't caught within a year, he'd strike again. Well, that's very psychic of you.
As time passed, winter turning to spring and then summer, eventually, the case went cold. Many speculating that the killer had come from out of town, though others in the villages still whispered about the Footpath Phantom.
Chapter 3, Dr. Alec Jeffries.
Everyone needs someone, and everybody loves somebody, but not just anyone. If you ain't looking, you might just as well be blind, 'cause it's so easy to love, but it's so hard to find. People say that's just the way it goes. A kind of woman's hard to find, and that's one thing that I know. When you ain't look, it's gonna pass you from behind. It's so easy to love, but it's so hard to find.
At the same exact time that all of this is going on, just 6 miles away at Leicester University, a young geneticist named Dr. Alec Jeffries was working on a fringe product in the university laboratory, trying to determine how genes evolve, specifically in human muscle. He was most interested in the repetitive sequence he found in the human myoglobin gene.
This little fringe product was of very little academic interest, as deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA molecules, were very troublesome for scientists and elusive because of how the material varied so much from one person to another.
But this is just what intrigued Dr. Alec Jeffries, and he wanted to try to identify the regions that displayed the most variation and try to find some way of highlighting those regions with a radioactive probe.
Dr. Jeffries, who had a bushy beard and was known for wearing baggy turtleneck sweaters and smoking hand-rolled cigarettes, was a bit of a firebrand and philosopher, once having stated about genetic studies,
Too many people still throw their hands in horror about the ethics or morality involved without really knowing what genetic engineering really is. It's amazing what could be done. New medical compounds could be made, and many diseases could be virtually eradicated.
So for his little fringe product, the doctor was experimenting with taking DNA molecules from blood cells, chopping them into unequal bits by adding enzymes to them, then putting them into an agarose gel where an electric field caused the larger fragments to separate from the smaller ones. The fragment pattern was then transferred to a nylon membrane with radioactively labeled probes that would stick to the hypervariable regions, and the membrane could then be X-rayed to show the radioactive pattern.
In September of 1984, they finished the experiment, developed the X-ray film, and looked at it, utterly stunned. It had worked. It had worked perfectly. In fact, it had worked better than they could ever have imagined.
To someone who wasn't a genetic scientist, it wouldn't have been that impressive looking. Just a series of gray and black bands. But Dr. Jeffries knew exactly what he was looking at. Human genetic markers. A person's utterly unique DNA imprint. They named the process genetic fingerprinting.
A long list of possible uses came to the scientists' minds. They could use it for bone marrow transplants of leukemia patients to determine whether grafts had taken or not. They could easily tell if newborn twins were fraternal or maternal. They could determine blood relationships to relatives to settle immigration disputes or prove paternity. They could use it in livestock to determine animal pedigree, particularly in cases of artificial insemination.
What they didn't immediately see this newfound technology for was solving murder cases. But it would come to them, and that's exactly what they would do. Use this revolutionary, brand new technology of determining a person's exact DNA fingerprint to find a killer just 6 miles away from their laboratory.
It's really crazy that this doctor discovered DNA testing, and one of its first uses was searching for a killer only 6 miles away.
And as the bearded and humble Dr. Alec Jeffries was being awarded, admitted as a fellow into the Royal Society, and given professorship at the university for his groundbreaking discovery that would change the course of human history, a 16-year-old hairdressing apprentice was leaving work and walking down Kirkdale Road toward the Kenilworth footbridge when a man leapt out of the shadows and grabbed her by the throat, pressing a screwdriver against her neck and telling her if she screamed, he'd kill her.
The man dragged her down an alley and into an open garage, telling her, "It'll all be over in a bit."
"Why me?" she asked.
"You're the only girl around, aren't ya?"
The girl stumbled and fell to the floor, and the man looked down at her and said, "Well, you'll have to suck it then," as he unzipped his pants and pressed the screwdriver against her face.
He began to force himself on her, then pulled back and barked at her. "Don't say anything to anybody, or I'll come find you," and darted out into the darkness as the young hairdresser sat in the cold, empty garage and wept.
It was a horrifying ordeal, and she'd been terrified to her very core, but she was alive. Incredibly sadly, the next girl wouldn't be so lucky.
Chapter 4. Dawn Ashworth and 10 Pound Lane.
The footpath that connected Narborough Village to Enderby Village was called 10-Pound Lane, or sometimes Green Lane by locals because it was so overgrown and lush, filled with tangled hawthorn bushes, birch and elm, patches of glistening nettles.
It was ancient, the remnants of an old Roman road. You entered through a wooden farm gate, then proceeded on a grassy dirt track through farmland, fields of fragrant grass hay, the path growing narrower and narrower as it wound through woodland, the vegetation growing so thick the branches brushed one's face and blotted out all sunlight. A path of fairies and sprites, like something out of Middle-earth, where hobbits would travel to and fro.
And like something out of a Grimm's fairy tale story, it was the 10-Pound Lane footpath that Dawn Ashworth would choose to follow when faced with a fork in the road.
Dawn Ashworth was 15 years old in the summer of 1986. Her father, Robin, was an engineer for British Gas. Her mother, the customer liaison, had an upmarket fashion store called Next, one of the fastest growing businesses in the United Kingdom. And she had a brother who was just a year younger than her.
Dawn was an artist, and as such was dreamy, often lost in the clouds, and her grades had suffered that year, which disappointed her parents. They were loving, kind, and understanding, her father thinking she was destined for art school.
Dawn had a summer job working at a newsagent's shop in Enderby. Her boss said she was a reliable and likable young lady who seemed to know everyone in the village.
That summer, Dawn had spent nearly every evening in neighboring Narborough. Her parents didn't like her out at night, so she was always home by 9:30 sharp. It was a strict rule.
On July 31st, 1986, Dawn received her wages from the newsstand and walked home, then told her mom she was going to have tea with her friends, Sue and Sharon, in Narborough, but said she'd be home by 7 to attend the birthday party of a family friend.
She left her house at 4 o'clock, wearing a white sweater, a skirt, and a blue denim jacket with, being the artist rebel, a pack of cigarettes and tube of lipstick, headed to Narborough, the next village over.
All the cool teenagers in the 80s smoked.
Then Dawn reached the fork. She could take the road, walk over the motorway, or she could cut through the forest and take 10-Pound Lane, which was much shorter.
Her father had warned her to never walk 10-Pound Lane, as there was a murderer, rapist, and flasher on the loose, the Footpath Phantom. But it was a beautiful summer day, and there were people out everywhere, joggers, couples holding hands, old folks walking their dogs. So she decided to take the shortcut and went in through the old farm gate.
This is such a fairy tale. She meandered down the path. There had been rain the night before, and the earth was damp and fragrant with the scent of rotting leaves.
She wound through and then out into the village of Narborough, the castle turrets of the ancient All Saints Church on the horizon. But to her dismay, she found her friends Sue and Sharon weren't home and had already left for the village center. So she decided to go back home for the birthday party back in Enderby.
Again, she faced the fork in the road, to stay on the motorway or cut through 10-Pound Lane. She'd just been through the wooded footpath a moment ago. Surely it was fine to take it home again.
Witnesses reported seeing Dawn Ashworth enter 10-Pound Lane on her way back home. They'd be the last to ever see her alive.
When Dawn didn't return home by 7 for the birthday party, her parents grew worried and went out searching for her. Her mother walking the footpath to Narborough and finding her friends Sue and Sharon there in the city center. Her friends said they hadn't seen Dawn all day.
And when Dawn wasn't home by 9:30, her curfew, they were frantic and called the police. The police seemed to think Dawn had just run off, angry at her parents, but out of duty, they gave a perfunctory search, laughing to her parents about how everything would be fine, though her mother and father insisted Dawn would never be late without calling.
But when she didn't show up the next day, the police began to take it very seriously, and 60 police were assigned to the case, searching the area with dogs, combing the woods around 10 Pound Lane.
And very creepily, Dawn's parents began receiving mysterious phone calls where the caller would just sit there silently, listening to their frantic sobs.
On the third day, searchers located her jacket by the footbridge, and the area was sealed off.
At noon, in an isolated area encircled by clumps of blackthorn bushes, an officer noticed a pair of pale fingertips poking from a bank of fresh-cut hay that had been draped in nettles and tree branches.
Deep within the cocoon of hay and bramble, they uncovered the body of Linda Mann, naked from the waist down, her underwear on her right ankle, shoes still on her feet.
She was covered in cuts and scratches from being dragged through the nettles. Her bra was pushed up, and there was a smear of dried blood extending from between her legs and down her left thigh.
In the summer heat, insects and rot had already begun to work on her.
The pathologist concluded she'd been beaten, bruising on her left eye and jaw, swelling on her lips, and a linear cut in her mouth, all of which suggested a right-handed attacker, holding her with one hand, beating her with another.
She had severe bruises and tears to her hymen, but no evidence of old hymen tears, meaning she'd been a virgin when she was assaulted. There were severe injuries to the perineum, which had a lack of reaction, and the injuries were therefore inflicted post-mortem, meaning the killer had sodomized her after her death.
It was ruled she died of manual strangulation and suffered from a stranglehold.
Like Linda Mann, there was dried seminal fluid in her pubic hair, which was tested and found to be from a Group A secretor.
There was no doubt about it. There was a serial killer loose, sexually assaulting and murdering teenage girls.
This time, more than 200 officers were assembled, double the amount assigned to the Linda Mann case, and a £15,000 reward was offered.
Reports came pouring in about a motorcycle parked under the motorway bridge and of a young man in a red helmet who'd been seen lurking in the vicinity.
And then witnesses came forward saying they'd seen a motorcyclist wearing a red helmet riding up and down Mill Lane, very slowly, the evening Dawn's body was discovered, watching the police search with quiet intensity.
It was soon discovered the mysterious motorcyclist was a 17-year-old named Richard Birkeland.
Chapter 5. Richard Birkeland.
Richard Birkeland was what the British call thick, or tuppence short a pound, terms for being mildly intellectually disabled. As one detective crudely put it, quote, "the flippin' village idiot you always hear about." Richard's father was a taxicab driver, and his mother worked at the Enderbury Leisure Centre.
3 years earlier, he'd been the boy on the bicycle that had been reported as a suspect to the police in the Linda Mann murder, because of how he lurked in the shadows of the footpaths, jumping out at women to scare them. But he'd been taken off the suspect list because he was deemed too young and frail to have been able to commit the crime.
But now he'd grown and was 6 foot tall, and he traded in his bicycle for a motorcycle.
He worked as a kitchen porter right there in the Carlton Hayes Psychiatric Hospital by the Black Pad, telling folks who asked, "I work in a loony bin."
He'd also developed quite the horrid reputation, walking up and fondling unsuspecting girls, molesting a 9-year-old neighbor, and always using terms like slags, dogs, whores, and bitches to refer to women.
While he'd been seen by witnesses in the vicinity, what truly put him on the police's radar and led to his interrogation and arrest was when he told a friend that Dawn's body had been found in a hedge near a gate by the bridge, later saying her body was hanging from a tree.
While she wasn't found hanging from a tree, she was concealed by tree limbs, and her body was inside an access gate near the M1 bridge. And he'd said all this 12 hours before the body had been located.
So on Friday, August 8th, 1986, at 5 o'clock in the morning, investigators drove to his parents' home and arrested him.
When his father heard they were arresting his son for murder, he said, "You're bloody joking. Why, you're crackers. I know me chappie. I know he's not done it, because I know my lad."
"We know him too," a detective snapped back.
Interviewed by police, he told them he'd seen Dawn that day walking towards the gateway, but he insisted he didn't kill her, at least at first. But then, after hours and hours of interrogation, he finally stated, "I can't remember. I probably really went mad and I don't know it. I don't feel in myself that I was responsible for her death. I feel like it's not me that done it, apart from being down toward the bridge, or in a kind of trance, making me do it. I can't remember."
But police just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and the intellectually disabled boy finally just told them what they wanted to hear. Yes, it was him. He said,
"I wanted someone to have sex with, and I didn't think she'd let me, so I tried it on. Then she started panicking, so I thought, if I leave her, she'll tell her mom and dad, and I'll be in trouble. So I did something about it. She started screaming, so I put my hand over her mouth. I took her pants off and had sex with her and buried her. And that's all I remember doing."
Police typed up a confession and he signed it. Then investigators announced that they'd caught the killer, despite him having been given a blood test and found to not be a PGM1A secretor. But they'd already paid over £113,000 in overtime. So the incident room was closed, and officers returned to regular duties, and that was that.
Chief Superintendent David Baker wasn't satisfied. No matter how hard they pressured the kid, he simply wouldn't admit that he'd also murdered Linda Mann. And he had to have done it. No way there was 2 killers with the exact same MO in the same little villages. The same person had to have murdered both girls.
So the chief superintendent decided to use the new technology that had just been discovered 6 miles away in Leicester University to prove it was him. A new technology called genetic fingerprinting.
Dr. Jeffries was more than eager to oblige. Anything that would bring attention to his discovery was appreciated. And this, a murder case, seemed the perfect way to show off his system of genetic identification.
But while the tests proved conclusively that, yes, the same man had murdered both girls, it was not in fact Richard Burland who had done it, and investigators were humiliatingly forced to release the 17-year-old, and the first person to ever be found innocent by DNA testing went free.
While the police were back to square one and looked like fools for announcing they'd caught their killer, the results for Dr. Alec Jeffries were everything he had hoped for. The media went wild. America's FBI invited him to their training center in Quantico, Virginia. And chemical giant ICI started a blood testing center in Cheshire, England.
And in the villages, the fear started again. Self-defense classes for women started. School buses were rerouted so that children wouldn't have to walk along the black pad. The reward went up to £20,000, and the historic 10-pound lane, which was an ancient Roman road, was completely cleared of brush and trees, mowed flat. The magical forest of fairy tales wiped clean.
Now investigators were faced with a dilemma. They absolutely had to match the DNA fingerprint to someone. But how? They came up with a bold answer. They'd test every single man in the village without an alibi. All of them. A great undertaking. They took to calling the blooding. And if anyone refused, then they would instantly become a number one suspect.
Chapter 6. All is quiet on New Year's Day.
On New Year's Day, 1987, it was announced that all unalibied male residents in the villages between the ages of 17 and 34 would be asked to submit blood and saliva samples voluntarily in order to eliminate them as suspects in the Footpath murders.
It's kind of weird to me that they're doing this, pretty astronomical. They're, undertaking this crazy endeavor to test all of these people, but they made the cutoff 17 to 34. What if the perpetrator was 16? What if he were 35? That just seems was that what they planned to just start with?
Yeah, that is what they started with, and it was criticized exactly like you're doing it by the police themselves, because it was based on the sperm viability, how healthy the sperm was. Is how
I was wondering if that's one of the things. I was actually wondering if that's what they used.
And then one of the police officers made some kind of famous quote well, I was able to make me wife get pregnant and I'm 45. And I don't know.
Oh, God. Well, every male born between January 1st, 1953 and December 31st, 1970, who lived, worked, or even had a recreational interest in the area, was sent a letter asking that they volunteer.
In the end, one detective would say, "We just hope that it might somehow flush the killer out."
Women would drag their boyfriends in and say, "I want him cleared." One saying, "Can you test him for syphilis while you're at it?"
Within a month, 1,000 men had given blood samples, and the forensic laboratory was swamped.
Teams of 5 doctors were drawing blood, and 90% of those asked volunteered, eager to be cleared.
The police began referring to the testing sessions as the bloodings when they came across a suspect saying, "We have to bloody this bloke."
Each person had to prove their identity by either showing a passport or giving a thumbprint and having their photo taken, as English driver's licenses had no pictures on them.
First, the samples were screened for A secretors. If they didn't fit in that small percentile, they were eliminated, which should have eliminated Richard Birkeland from the very start. I still don't get that.
When the village centers were all tested, mobile teams went out into the countryside, searching for blood, and soon 2,000 blood tests had been performed.
Meanwhile, in that January of 1986, the Pitchforks had a second child, another son named James, though Colin lamented and complained that he had wanted a daughter. Though why this sick fuck wanted a daughter is beyond me.
In July, Colin had another affair, this time with a woman he worked with at the bakery who was in the process of getting divorced. He got her pregnant. She thought of having an abortion and actually made the appointment, but in the end couldn't go through with it and decided to keep the baby. Colin said he supported her decision and hoped it was a daughter.
One night, Carol came home to find Colin glued to the television, remarking that they'd released the boy accused of the 10-Pound Lane murder. And she said,
"If he wasn't the one, now what? I don't think they'll catch anyone until it happens again."
Colin shook his head. They just haven't a clue, have they?
Colin was now second in command at the bakery and was known as the most exquisite cake maker in all the villages. He charged loads of money for his fanciest cakes, which even came with accessories. And he talked and talked of opening his own bakery that sold only high-priced cakes, the best in Britain.
In January of 1987, the woman Colin had been having an affair with and gotten pregnant prematurely went into labor and delivered a stillborn daughter. Colin was greatly upset, saying how badly he wanted to have a little girl, and he insisted on viewing the corpse of the baby.
The baby was buried in the Wixton Cemetery, and Colin would go to the grave, fall to his knees, and weep.
Which is also weird, as he was a complete sexual predator and murderer who targeted young girls and gave no thought to their mothers and fathers, who were forced to go view their dead children for identification. It seems like he was trying to gaslight himself into believing that he was a human with actual feelings.
Then he received a letter from the police asking that he voluntarily come and give blood, with a time and date to report.
He told Carolyn he was afraid to go, and when she asked why, he said, "They're flashing. Don't you know the copper's going to take one look at that flashing record and give me trouble?"
It made no sense to Carol, who said the best thing he could do was give his blood and prove it wasn't him. But Colin failed to report at the specified time and date.
And soon another letter came, again requesting him at a scheduled time to give blood. And again, he refused. Carol began to get uneasy about it all, telling him,
"This no longer makes any sense, Colin. You're going to take that test. Now I'm the one demanding it, not the bleeding coppers."
"And if I get chucked in the nick for me past record while they waste time sorting out the test, will that satisfy you too then, eh?"
"Take the test, Colin."
In January of 1987, a year since the testing had begun, Colin asked a fellow employee at the bakery to take the test for him, saying he'd been arrested for flashing when he was very young, and now he was afraid to give a blood test because he was terrified of the police, and he offered the guy £200 to do it for him.
The baker wisely refused his bizarre offer, telling him he needed to face his fears to conquer them.
Colin then asked another baker, telling him he'd been unjustly accused of flashing by hysterical females who'd seen him taking a piss, saying, "I were innocent, but that didn't matter none, and it wouldn't matter now. I could be set up because of me past record."
The baker told him he had nothing to fear and that he'd go with him, but refused to take the test for him.
So Colin went to yet another baker, this one a young guy, who got pissed off about it, saying it wasn't right what he was asking.
Then Colin tried his spiel on a new worker to the bakery, a bloke by the name of Ian Kelly.
Chapter 7. Ian Kelly.
Ian Kelly was an oven man at the bakery, and had only worked there for a few months. He looked up to Colin, both as a baker and because he drove a motorcycle around, which Ian thought was really cool.
Yeah, Ian really reminds me of Spud from Train Spotting. A nice guy with good intentions, but someone whose kindness always gets taken advantage of. And I just see Spud's goofy face when I think of Ian.
Colin tried a new approach with Ian, saying to him,
I've been sent a letter about the blood test. I can't take it.
Why? Ian asked quizzically.
Well, see, I already took it. See, this other bloke, he had a spot of trouble from flashing and doing robberies when he were young. Scared they'd try to put it on him because of that record. So he talked me into it. I didn't think they'd bother with me. I didn't even live in the bleeding village when that first girl got killed. But now they sent me a letter too, and I'm in trouble because of him.
Colin then let the matter go, giving his ploy time, working the old bait and switch. Then at the end of January, after letting it stew, Colin brought it back up to Ian, saying,
I got to give the blood on the 27th. Why don't you do it for me? I did it for the other bloke after all, and I didn't know him near as well as you know me. Now I might get nicked if they find out I gave blood twice. Look, I got kids. You don't have no kids. You can keep me for getting in trouble.
Ian finally agreed.
Oh man, why this poor sap agreed to give his blood for Colin is just a mystery to me. And really, sadly, although she never told Ian, Colin Pitchfork had once drunkenly grabbed Ian's wife's ass at a party and suggested they go out back and have a shag. She told him to keep his hands to himself and stormed away, though she never did tell her husband, hoping to avoid drama. But this whole thing is just so sad and pathetic.
Colin drove Ian to a photo booth and got a passport picture taken. Then, using a razor, removed his own photo from his passport and inserted Ian's photo into his passport.
Colin then drove Ian, who was sick at the time with 104 temperature, to the police station, and Ian went in with the passport, identified himself as Colin Pitchfork, and gave blood and saliva samples.
Afterward, when Colin asked him how it went, Ian told him, Doodle, dead easy.
Cheers, mate, Colin said, and mum's the word.
Chapter 8. The Blooding Debate.
As the blooding went on into its second year, having now tested thousands of men and still not found their murderer, the National Council of Civil Liberties wondered just how ethical all this was.
The letters that were sent out stated that the blood tests were completely voluntary, but the implication was that if you didn't volunteer, trouble was coming to you. And certain folks were rounded up and more or less forced to come give blood.
There was also the question of what the police were going to do with all the DNA information afterwards. The Police and Criminal Evidence Act required any negative samples to be destroyed, but it didn't mention what would happen to the actual information they had taken, all those DNA fingerprints.
The Civil Liberties said it, quote, smacked of Big Brother, end quote, and stated that it could lead to all babies in Britain eventually being forced to give blood and fingerprints at birth, a harrowing infringement on civil rights.
And I agree. I mean, of course I want a murdering rapist to be caught, but at the same time, I want to live in a free society. It's a weird balancing act. And the police actually could be cruel to the suspects they didn't like. There was this one doctor who took blood, and he was like really old with really bad eyesight. And he would always miss the vein, like nearly every time, sometimes requiring as many as 5 stabs with the needle. And any person who gave the police a hard time was sent to this half-blind doctor as punishment.
By May 1987, the number of men and boys bloodied was up to 3,653, which was 98% of those requested in the letters.
And by July 31st, they had tested 4,000 men.
On Dawn's birthday, desperate police put up covert cameras at her grave, hoping the killer would come there as some sort of sick way of reliving the crime. And sure enough, a strange man did come, wandering slowly toward the grave, then stood before it.
Police swooped in and grabbed him, then roughly hauled him to the station to be interrogated and forced to give a blood sample.
But it ended up he was just a salesman from out of town who had an hour to kill and went on a random walk, had no idea who Dawn Ashworth even was, just happened upon the grave and stopped because there were so many flowers there.
Afterwards, the salesman vowed he'd never go into a graveyard again.
As the summer of 1987 came to a close, the police drove blood buses out to housing estates and factories, growing more and more desperate in their search for blood. Dracula jokes became rampant.
They went to fairs and tested carnival workers, to construction sites and tested traveling laborers.
And many police continued to think that it was Richard Birkeland, and that the whole newfound DNA testing was a sham. Some officers thought they should give it up, while others thought they should begin blooding in other villages, like Whetstone.
In an interview, an inspector said, "Well, somebody's bound to say something in an unguarded moment, and now that's the kind of information we need."
And indeed, the inspector was right, and there was nothing like a few pints of beer to loosen a tongue.
Chapter 9, The Clarendon Pub.
The Clarendon Pub in Leicester was a bohemian pub for students and writers that had become trendy.
It was right beside the Hampshire Bakery and was often frequented by workers looking for a quick bite and a few pints.
One afternoon during lunch break, Ian Kelly went there with some other employees for a lunchtime pint and a cob, a roll filled with meat and cheese. And as the beer flowed, talk turned to gossip about the head baker, Colin Pitchfork. How he couldn't stay away from women, how he inappropriately flirted and came on to every woman employee in the bakery.
Ian grinned and said, "Colin had me take the blood test for him." He's fucking so spud. Then casually went to get another pint.
The other bakers looked around. One said, "Yeah, he asked me to take it." Another said, "Me as well." They all agreed. He's a weird bloke, that Colin.
And the shop manager was very dismayed to hear all this. The thought grew on her and grew on her.
It just so happened that the owner of the Clarendon Pub's son was a police constable. So she rang him up, saying,
"This is probably a waste of your time, but my conscience forced me to ring. There's this bloke down at the bakery named Ian, who claims to have taken the blood test for another worker."
But police, who'd now tested 4,000 men and had grown completely desperate in their search for blood, it wasn't a waste of time at all. They wanted to hear all about it.
Chapter 10, Busted.
The summer and autumn of 1987 were going great for Colin Pitchfork. He'd managed to evade the blood testing. His marriage was better than it had ever been. Carol remarking how mature he'd become, how he was so accepting of his responsibilities. He was moving forward with his desire to open his own bakery, had a business plan written out, and was seeing a banker about a loan. The police were even commissioning him to make custom cakes for them, one in the shape of a Bobby's helmet. You know those tall hats British police wear?
But as the year came to an end, Colin's luck was about to change drastically. On Friday, the 18th of December, a young Bobby whose father owned the local pub near Hampshire Bakery reported some gossip he'd heard about a bloke named Colin Pitchfork who'd had a friend take the blood test for him.
Investigators pulled a signature from Colin's files and compared it to the signature from the blooding. The two didn't match, so they headed out to see this bloke named Ian Kelly, who supposedly had given blood for his friend.
When Ian Kelly opened the door, two investigators told him,
"We're from the murder inquiry incident room at Narborough, investigating the murders of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. Have you given a blood sample regarding those inquiries?"
"No, not me."
"We have reason to believe you've given a blood sample."
No, I haven't."
"We've talked to other people at the bakery. I believe you have."
Oh, yes, you're right. I did it for another lad at work." So Spud.
The inspectors asked, "Who'd that be then, eh?"
Colin Pitchfork.
"You're under arrest for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice."
Police then went to the home of Colin Pitchfork. And here we can really see the difference between American police and British police. For if police in America were going to take a serial killer in, they'd have crazy warrants, SWAT teams, guns, the house would be surrounded. In Britain, they just went and calmly knocked on the door. And as Carol said,
"At first I thought they were insurance men. I thought perhaps it was a car accident. They came in and said they were police officers and asked to speak to Colin."
Colin appeared, and they politely asked to speak to him privately, and Carol left the room. And then they told him, very matter-of-factly,
"From inquiries we've made, we believe you're responsible for the murder of Dawn Ashworth on the 31st of July, 1986. I'm going to have to arrest you on suspicion of that murder. Do you understand then, eh?"
Colin calmly replied, "First, give me a few minutes to speak to my wife."
"What do you want to talk to your wife about?"
"Well, it's going to be a long time till I see her again. You've got to let me say goodbye." Which they allowed. "Cheerio, have a spot of tea then."
Then Colin's little boy is yelling from the living room, "Daddy, the telly won't work. I want to watch the A-Team."
So they let Colin go and adjust the television tuning for his son while his wife comes downstairs.
Carol looked at the detectives, then looked at Colin, then looked back at the detectives again.
Colin went to hug her, but she backed away, and he told her, "They've come to arrest me."
"What for?"
"For them murders."
"But you went for the blood test. You got a letter saying it was negative."
"I didn't go. Ian went."
"Did you do it? Did you do it? Did you?"
"Yes."
And Carol exploded into a whirlwind of anger, leaping on Colin, kicking and scratching and hitting.
The detectives jumped in, began pulling her off of him as she took one final kick, missing Colin and hitting a detective right in the crotch.
On the way to the police station, Colin told them,
"I'll tell you everything, but I want to do it my own way, because it's really a story of me life."
Here we see the psychopath's desire to control all situations. He wanted the power, and they let him have it.
They sat him down, literally gave him a cup of tea, so British, and let him begin rambling on, and on, and on, and on, starting with his birth. Then his childhood, his domineering mother, his time in the Scouts, all of it. The bored police patiently waiting for him to confess to the murders, which he eventually did.
But though he admitted to strangling both Dawn and Linda, he painted a rather rosy picture of it all, saying about Linda Mann,
Yeah, I raped her in a way, but it wasn't forcible. Rather than scream and struggle and fight, she just decided to let me do it.
This, despite the obvious signs of a struggle, the bruises to her face and her bloody nose. Colin telling him that he'd been gentle with her, that he'd told her during the ordeal,
Try and relax. I'll try not to hurt you. Are you all right?
and Colin denied that he'd either sodomized Dawn Ashworth or had sex with her corpse after she was dead, though the autopsy proved as much.
His confession was cold, detached, as if he was describing a book or movie he'd seen. He told the detectives, I ain't proud. I'm just staying calm because you want the story out of me.
Colin Pitchfork then admitted he'd thought about killing Ian Kelly, the poor sap who'd taken the blood test for him many times, but thought it might come back to him.
Chapter 11. Afterwards.
Bumbling, good-natured Ian Kelly, the spud of our story, who was referred to by police as a, quote, extremely gullible person, was given an 18-month prison sentence, but it was suspended for 2 years, meaning he would serve no time. He came out of the courtroom trembling and told reporters,
I was wrong for what I did. I'm sorry for whoever I've caused a grievance to.
Colin Pitchfork pled guilty, throwing himself on the mercy of the court, and was therefore granted leniency for his horrible crimes.
His lawyers stated,
He will remain forever haunted by the images and knowledge of what he has done.
which, come on, is absolute bullshit. Haunted? He probably relives those crimes in his head all the time for pleasure. He is a true sociopath who said he gets off on doing things he knows he shouldn't do.
The judge gave him a double life sentence for the murders, a 10-year sentence for each of the rapes, and 3 years each for the sexual assaults, and another 3 years for the conspiracy involving Ian Kelly.
But, oh God, these terms were to be concurrent, all served at the same exact time. And the judge didn't give a minimum term, meaning he could be released in as little as 10 or 12 years. The judge saying that he'd receive therapy in prison for his condition.
Unreal. We all know there is no curing a psychopath. Therapy won't make a remorseless monster feel empathy.
Regardless, the devious sociopath conned the prison psychologist into thinking he was cured. And on September 21st, 2021, Colin Pitchfork, convicted rapist and child murderer, was released from prison on parole.
And what does he do when he's released? He immediately breaks his parole by stalking and harassing young women. A leopard does not change its spots.
So he was thrown back in prison. But in June 2023, it was announced that he was again going to be released from prison. What the fuck? They're going to let him out again? But this time, the Lord Chancellor intervened and ordered that the board reconsider their decision, and a new hearing was held, which denied the release of this monster.
But Colin Pitchfork then challenged the parole board's decision on procedural grounds, and in February 2024, the board agreed to schedule another hearing before a different panel to consider his potential release. In October 2025, just 4 months ago, there was yet another hearing. This time, the parole board turned down Pitchfork's parole application and also refused permission for him to be moved to an open prison.
Good. Fuck him. He's a manipulative, conniving monster. Let him rot.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, this was the story of Colin Pitchfork, the Pathway Phantom, and first murderer to ever be found through DNA testing. Thank you all so much for listening.
And you have a case you'd like us to cover, let us know at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Hope you enjoyed it. We will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye-bye.